Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you're calling in from. My name is Elizabeth Roth, and I am the Research and Data Science Strategist for NNLM Region 2. And welcome to Research Data Services Shop Talk with NNLM Region 2. Just a few housekeeping notes before we begin. The session is being captioned and recorded. Please use the chat feature to ask any questions or share comments as we go along. And you can also save them until the end when we will have a Q&A with the 5 presenters. Just make sure everyone is selected so we can all see the questions. PowerPoint slides and a link to the recording will be made available about a week following the presentation to the email that you registered with. And then finally, this class is eligible for 1.5 MLA credits and will count towards the data services specialization. We will send out a link to the class of evaluation in the follow-up email. And after the evaluation, you'll receive the CE code to claim your credit. Next slide. I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement, which are honest and historically accurate way to recognize Native communities. Presenting land acknowledgements recognizes histories that have been systematically erased. The Native peoples of this region include the Etowah, Kiowa, Santee, Edisto, Natchez, Cusco, and Wassamasaw people. The Region 2 RML recognizes the Native communities of the land on which we live and work in Charleston, South Carolina. We commit to remaining mindful to use our work to support the health and well-being of all people, including Native communities. Next slide. Additionally, we'd like to have a labor acknowledgement to recognize how historically much of the substantial economic development in a geographic area or industry resulted from unpaid labor and forced servitude of people of color, specifically people from Africa. The Region 2 RML acknowledges that much of what we know of this country today was possible because of the labor of enslaved Africans, their descendants, immigrant workers, impoverished people, domestic workers, and others. We commit to remaining mindful and to use our work to support the health and well-being of all people, including those whose labor has been historically exploited. Next slide. Finally, I would like to share our Region 2 community agreements that we ask you to take part in our webinars. Take care of yourself. No one knows everything. Together we know a lot. Make space, take space. One mic, one voice. Understand the difference between impact and intent. Respect confidentiality. Be curious and respectful. And these were adapted from the GLSEN guidelines from Respectful GSA Spaces. So thank you for being here with Region 2 today, and I will pass it off to Jess.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth. My name is Jess Newman-McDonald. I'm at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center, and I'm our Research Data and Scholarly Communications Lead. And I will be moderating today's session. So I just want to welcome you all to today's exploration of the oftentimes dynamic, sometimes confusing world of research data services. Our speakers are bringing a wealth of experiences and insights that we hope will help spur some ideas, discussion, and collaboration with our colleagues in Region 2 and beyond. We're going to begin with an opportunity for attendees to respond to some poll questions through a Padlet. Then we'll hear from our 5 speakers coming to us from a variety of institutions in Region 2. And we're going to end, as Elizabeth mentioned, with a Q&A and some more facilitated discussion if we have time. So first, we're going to hear a lightning talk from Megan Sheffield. And discover the career pivot that she took from research data librarian to research data practices lead, unveiling the nuances of library and IT roles. Then we're going to learn from Marla Hurt about the University of Mississippi Library success with their R for Graduate Students workshop series, offering invaluable lessons and structuring effective programming workshops. We're going to hear from Savannah Kelly to gain insights into effective communication between librarians and scientific researchers, which are vital for seamless research data management. I just realized I'm mixing up some of these names and their titles. I'm so sorry. But I will let them introduce themselves and they will give you a much better overview of what they're talking about. We're going to hear from Mandy Swigart-Hobaugh, Georgia State University, and Ali Kirsten from Auburn University. And then we are going to move on to our Q&A and further discussion. So without further ado, I'm going to move us on to our Padlet poll. We have got a QR code if you want to do that on your phone. If you pull it up on your phone, you'll be able to scroll through the poll questions by swiping left. And the poll questions are also here on the screen for you to peruse. And then we've got a URL that we will put in the chat for you to look at as well. We're going to take about 10 minutes to do that. I hope that kind of gets your juices flowing, helps you facilitate a little bit of discussion amongst yourselves. And then you'll be able to return to that Padlet after the session today and learn more from other people, find some people to talk to or collaborate with potentially, and just keep this moving on into the future. So do we have that? Yes, we've got that in the chat. And I will stop sharing for just a second so that I can pull that up and we can look at it together if we would like. Great. So I'm seeing quite a few people are at the very beginning of this journey for research data services. So I know here at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center, that was us about a year ago. So we're familiar with that landscape. And I think hearing from our presenters today will certainly help give us some ideas about opportunities to move forward in this space. Looks like both in terms of challenges and the primary role, a lot of individuals trying to tackle this by themselves or a lack of personnel being a big challenge. So I know that's familiar to many of us as well. Talking a little bit specifically about the NIH and the DMSP policy. That is how actually we got started here at UT as well. That was kind of an impetus for us to put a little bit more resources and attention into data services. And I know that's been a big topic conversation within some of the MLA caucuses I'm in as well as the NNLM educational opportunities. Great. So a lot of great conversation going on here. And then we'll talk about this a little bit more at the end if we have time. But other topics that you would potentially like to explore, if you have ideas for that as we go through our session today, please feel free to pop them in there. And then if you'd like to be a part of future conversations around data services, you can leave your email address in there or however you'd like to be contacted. And we will keep you in the loop with further opportunities. All right, so I'm gonna give us about 1 more minute on that, just so we have plenty of time for our speakers today to introduce themselves and their topics, and lots of time for questions at the end, because I am certain that we will have them and want to hear more from them. I'm going to stop that share. Get us back over to our presentation. And that will take us to Megan Sheffield.
Hi, everybody. All right. Sorry, I was just reading all the responses, so I'm really enjoying that. All right. So my name is Megan Sheffield. I'm from Emory University, and I am actually going to talk to you today about a recent career change I went through. I actually switched roles entirely, different institution, and I'm really nervous to talk about this with you guys. I'll get more into that later. But it's, it feels a little bit like I'm coming into your librarian talk, trying to convince you to not be librarians anymore, which is not my goal. But anyway, we'll get through it. Next slide, please. There we go. Before I can really explain some of the nuances involved here, I did want to take you through my career so far, just very quickly. I promise we're not going to go into depth on all of this. My educational background, I have a bachelor's and a master's in biology, specifically biomechanics. I realized during that second master's that I did not want to be a research scientist. So I kind of changed course. I went to library school at University of Maryland. I focused on academic librarianship. I wanted to be a science librarian. So after graduation, I got a job at USF, which is in Tampa, as one of their science librarians. And I worked there for a couple of years until I was recruited at Clemson University in 2012. Clemson is actually where I got that first BS and MS in biology. And I knew a lot of the librarians there really well, and they knew my background, which was why they reached out to me when their science librarian retired. So I came in 2012 as a science librarian. I technically had the title e-science librarian, which was an entirely made up term that I grew to hate over this several years I was there. I came in as a faculty librarian at the rank of assistant. And so that was, tenure track. And in 2019, I did achieve tenure. By that time, I had also started just some very basic data services. We didn't have any before that, but because of my own background working in the sciences, I knew a little bit about what was needed. I knew a little bit about the various, federal government mandates regarding that. And so I was trying to roll out just, a few limited data services as we had time. It was kind of a little side project I did in addition to being a science librarian. In 2019, the same year I got tenure, we decided to make that a full-term position or full-time position as well. And that is when I officially got to change my title and became the data services librarian. So that's also when I went up to associate. Then, the pandemic happened. Shortly after that, I felt like I barely got a chance to really get started being a data services librarian. And along with, I'm sure a lot of other universities went through similar changes, but we had a lot of turnover in our personnel in the library and created a lot of vacancies. We also happened to be in the middle of a reorg. And so somewhere in that shuffle, I became the interim head of a brand new department called Open Scholarship. We didn't have kind of a ScholComm unit at the time. And so this was going to be the beginning of a scholarly communications department, and I was made the head of it. I also served as the faculty senator for the library, which means I was really, really, really involved in a lot of kind of faculty matters, I guess. However, at the beginning of this year, I was approached by a recruiter from Emory University about a position that they had been having some trouble filling within their IT department. And so my title now, I did end up going with that one. It's Research Data Practices Lead, and that's a staff role. It's not faculty. Next slide. So I got a lot of skeptical, conversations with people, with coworkers, with friends and family. I've been working towards this tenure position as a faculty librarian for basically my entire professional life. And I was leaving it for a staff position in IT at another university. I didn't realize it until I actually made the change, but I very strongly kind of identify as a librarian. So this was really a big change for me. I like to tell people I'm still a librarian at heart, but that's really what I'm here to talk about, is kind of what I have learned in the transition, because I think there's a lot of things that librarians can take away from it to just improve services overall. I know I've certainly learned a lot, so I'm going to share. Next slide. So before I really get into some of the other specifics, I wanted to talk about some job market trends. This is what I've been seeing. Maybe some other things have been coming through your own inboxes. But research data services is a huge growing field, especially with some of the new agency mandates. It's more and more common for universities to be looking to fill positions like this. They're creating them from scratch. A lot of them, especially the ones that we see, are in the library, but they're in other departments as well. So especially if a school has a medical school associated, health system, a lot of those are also creating kind of parallel teams within IT. A lot of people are getting more conversant in these issues in other areas of the university, like research administration, because it's really getting more and more important. Research data services, research data management itself as a field is kind of growing enough now that it's starting to split into a couple of subcategories. When I first started doing this kind of stuff, it was really just, talking to people about data management plans. So, but now you see a couple of varieties of jobs. And I can't remember the title of the presentation, but there was a really good NNLM webinar that I attended back in, I think, May, where they really broke this down and went into the two kind of sub branches. But you have data management and curation on one side, which is kind of, to me, that was the part that I was really more involved in. And then you also have data science and data literacy on the other side. And that's where you have, people that know more about working with coding and visualizations and actually working with the data. There's a lot of overlap here with IT. So a lot of times you'll see people with different titles that actually do have similar skills once you get them to talk to each other. Obviously in IT, the focus is more on the systems and the technology than in, information access, I guess. But the piece that they really, really, really still need, and this is the reason an IT department came after me, they want the context of open access, scholarly communications, open scholarship in general. They really need that context. That's the piece that they seem to be missing in IT. Next slide, please. I imagine a lot of people in this group are probably already very familiar with this initiative, this study that's been ongoing for a couple of years now. But just in case you're not, I'll talk a little bit about this and orient you to what you're actually seeing here. So this is a visualization taken from a report from the RDS initiative. And I've got the link there. I don't actually have the link handy on my desktop to share it, but I can put that in the chat later. But this was a study that's funded by ARL and NSF, and I believe the Data Curation Network and these universities are all kind of co-PIs on this study. But they're looking at how universities are actually making data sharing happen. So here, what you're looking at is it's modeled after the life cycle, the data life cycle. So if you've got your bingo card, there you go. You can mark off your data life cycle square. And you see this is where libraries are involved. So each ring of this circle represents a different university. These are all the universities that are involved in the project at the moment. And you can see all the different stages, all the different sub-stages even that they are involved with from the library side. So you can see there's a lot of involvement in the planning and design and startup of projects. There is a lot of involvement in making data broadly available. That's the green and the red. There's also a lot in data retention, including things like preservation and archives and long-term access, but the others are a bit spotty. Next slide, please. Then, so this is the same kind of visualization, but this time they ask the IT departments which sections they are involved with. And to me, the big takeaway here is they're involved in a lot of it. And at least, universities I had worked at previously, there was not a ton of communication about these things between the library and IT. So, the first time I saw this, I was kind of surprised to see exactly how much IT considers themselves involved in. Yes, thank you for the link in the chat. That is the one that I was talking about earlier. So you can see they're not as involved. IT is not as involved in the red section, which is making data broadly available, but they are much, much more involved in this blue section down here, data collection, storage. And I think the end of that was supposed to say management, but it gets cut off by Tableau. Next slide, please. Some of the big differences that I've experienced since I joined an IT department are just in the approaches to customer service. So in the library, which is all I had really ever known before, there's a huge focus on innovation, maximizing access, and never saying no. The strength in the library to me is matching users to the right resources, which means you have to know both of those pretty well, right? You have to know your users, and then you also have to know the resources to be able to match them. Again, this is all just from my experience. I'm sure it's different at other places, but I usually see librarians and library employees encouraged to develop rapport with patrons, to develop kind of a personal touch, right? And sometimes you see this in terms of like you have your LibGuides profile that you try and push out there as much as you can. You make it super easy for people to find you specifically and to make an appointment with you specifically.
1 minute, Megan.
Oh, what was that? Sorry.
1 minute.
1 minute. Thank you. That's really different in IT. So in IT, the focus is really on security and compliance and the technical side. Employees are encouraged to maintain a really standard and repeatable level of service across the entire organization, which is where you get things like ticketing systems and kind of canned responses, which leads to a very low visibility of individuals. Next slide. Transferable skills. I thought this was one of the things that I was really curious when they first approached me about this kind of job. You know, what was I really going to bring to the table? So what I brought to the table, and I can see it now because I've been there for a little over 6 months, is the subject matter expertise about data management and the bigger scholarly communications area. I also bring a lot of training and experience in communication and instruction. You know, some stereotypes do have a little bit of truth to them, and a lot of IT people are really uncomfortable getting up in front of people and talking, and also planning lessons. And I'm also pretty creative and collaborative, and I'm not afraid to do kind of wacky things sometimes, which kind of seems to not be the norm in IT. Next slide. I think we're almost there. There we go. So my big takeaways are just that it's really a culture shock. It's really tough for me to try and find who's responsible for different things, just because they tend not to put their names on stuff, which is very different. I don't miss faculty status most of the time. It really is a weight off my shoulders once I kind of thought about it more and realized that I wasn't really gaining a lot from it. And it was just adding expectations that I was not necessarily being compensated for. I don't miss it most of the time. So in conclusion, just to everybody else here, don't limit yourself if you are, you know, looking for jobs, or if you're trying to hire somebody and you're looking for a data services librarian at your school, at your institution. Don't limit yourself to other people within the library sphere. Don't limit your job search to just library jobs. There's a lot of other people out there that have skill sets that can be transferable and make good colleagues. So you can go to the next slide, but I think that's about it. I have my email address. There you go.
Wonderful. Thank you. Now we're moving on to Marla.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much to Region 2 organizers for putting on this programming and for inviting me to speak today. I'm really excited to be here to share with you some tips on communicating with researchers from my own personal lens as a former researcher scientist and my current role as research data management librarian. So kind of opposite talk where I was not in a library and then decided to go into one. Next slide, please. Okay, great. So my data management teaching philosophy really has been sculpted from my own experiences doing research. And because of that, I wanted to outline my career journey so you could see a little bit about where my influences have come from. I got my undergraduate degree in microbiology in Maryland, and then I moved to Alabama at UAB, where I earned my PhD, also in microbiology. And traditionally, after a PhD program, graduates do a postdoc to train further into some research subspecialty towards the ultimate goal of becoming an independent research faculty. Now, nowadays, there's even more diverse career options out there, but the postdoc is still the most common next step, especially in my discipline. And so in my case, I was accepted into a postdoctoral program, also at UAB, that was 75% research, 25% teaching. And that allowed me to develop some courses and teach students. So on top of my research experience, I was getting some teaching experience. moved to St. Louis and went to Wash U there. And I took on a much more traditional research heavy postdoc, which quickly turned into like a senior scientist position. If you're not familiar with that type of position, it's not running a lab and it's not faculty, but I was operating as sort of a project manager. I was conducting research and I was also like overseeing research technicians. A few years ago, my family moved back to Birmingham and I was looking to figure out what my next career move was. I knew I didn't want to be research faculty, and so I wasn't exactly sure what my next step was. And so I fortuitously learned about a research data management position at UAB Libraries, and I was immediately attracted to it because really one of my favorite parts about working in a lab was to be able to like facilitate others to make their research happen. And so I realized that this was such a great opportunity, which would take advantage of my research background, my organizational skills, and also my teaching background. So that's kind of where I ended up. And the sort of the second reason for showing this path was to kind of highlight the different traditional career stages of an academic researcher from undergraduate all the way to faculty. Because as I'll explain later in this talk, one of my main goals is to tailor data management instruction specifically to address the needs at each of these different career stages. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's move into some dirty details. So this is a real life example of poorly managed data that occurred in one of the research groups that I worked in. And I love to share this example because this is what happened, and I think it's fairly typical. So on the left, you can see a list of experimental sample preparations. The details here are not important, but I included it just so you could get a sense of the complexity and also our very non-standardized record keeping. These samples were prepared by different members of our research group, and then those samples were outsourced to a core facility, which analyzes them and sends back data files. So when it came time to do the analysis for this final paper, the team realized they had no way of knowing which of those samples went with which corresponding data set. So I know you guys are all probably squirming in your seats right now, thinking of all the simple fixes that could have been put in place at the beginning to prevent this from occurring. But it did happen. And most likely, this is just like so many projects. It started out small with just a couple samples. The people who started it kind of had a handle of it, but then over about 5 years, it just snowballed into this sort of mishap. So it delayed analysis for over several months. Data was finally found in like someone's garage. It was a big mess. But it's a real common example of what can go wrong. I do want to say that I want to partially absolve this group. The lab that I was working with has really excellent data management practices around conducting field research, going out into the field and doing research there. But that was something they'd been doing for like over 30 years. But this particular problem arose because they had moved into using a new technique. And so I think this really nicely highlights a critical need for data management training whenever a researcher is entering into a new research area. And of course, this naturally applies to early career researchers who are not experienced in the best practices. And those are a key demographic that I target in my teaching. Next slide, please. Okay, so how do problems like this happen? So I think one of the big reasons is that traditionally speaking, researchers have little to no formal training in research data management. The emphasis during their career is placed on scientific outcomes, and it's not on proper documentation or data stewardship. And so as a result, the training is ad hoc, it's sporadic, it leaves gaps in knowledge. Personally speaking, my research spanned across several disciplines, and I just can't tell you how many hours I've spent like combing through old data, old computer files of prior lab members, because these practices that people were using were just sort of a product of passing knowledge from one person to another. So really, I learned things by trial and error and seeing how others did it. And most of the time, I just learned what not to do, and then sort of slowly built up a system that worked for me, which was inefficient to say the least. So researchers really need more practice and thinking about their project through the data management lens. Next slide, please. And thank you for Your echoing statement, Allie, in the chat. Okay, so one of the other consequences of the lack of formal data management training was I was not aware of what I didn't know, which is dangerous, right? So I just wanted to share with you some of my reasons why I didn't share data associated with the publications that I put out. So one was I didn't know it was an option. Another was that I sort of followed whatever my mentor, my PI did, and said, we didn't need to. So I was like, okay, that's fine. And to me, the concept of sharing by request sounded really reasonable. And then, in some cases, I truly thought I did share the data. But if you go back to some of my old works, and I've done this, the data was not really raw, and it was not in a user-friendly format. I'm talking about PDFs of large tables, so no. And so I think that a lot of this would not have happened if I had had formal training and if our labs had some data management plans in place. Next, please. So to me, this has an obvious solution. It's to offer formal data management training. And I know many of you are currently doing great work in this endeavor. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit through how I think about it. I think about data management education along the spectrum, starting with opt-in training like webinars and workshops. They're just a great way to get started. This type of one-off instruction can open the door to integrating data management into courses. So that's sort of the next step. So for example, I've added data management modules into our undergraduate research training course that undergrads have to take before they start working in a lab. And I teach the data management section as part of the NIH's required responsible conduct of research course. So that's reaching graduate students and postdocs. And then finally, I think it's really important to push to institutionalize data management requirements into these educational programs. So one of my long-term goals is to add a DMP requirement to master's and PhD programs. So meaning that when students go through those programs, they need to write a data management plan for their dissertational or thesis research. Next, please. So providing training is great, but I think that in order for the training to be effective, it needs to be specifically geared towards whatever career stage someone's in and really focus on early career development. For the purpose of this talk, for early career, I'm meaning up to the assistant professor faculty level. And I think this is such a key group because we're training the next generation of researchers. And it doesn't hurt that this group is going to be likely more receptive to the teachings that we offer than like established research faculty. So in this slide here, you can see some examples of activities that I would do for these different career stages. So for undergrads, maybe sharing data with those students and talking about what's needed to understand that data, how should it be formatted, what metadata do we need. For groups like graduate students or postdocs, we could take a research article, look through it, and determine what data would need to be shared in order to reproduce those analyses. And as an aside, thanks. As an aside, I lumped those two groups together, grad students and postdocs, but I firmly believe they have different needs. But unfortunately, I don't have time for that. That's a whole another talk. Lastly, early career faculty, I would do things like emphasizing the positives of shifting to open data. I would help dispel their fears about someone scooping their research if they share data. And I think this group needs a lot of resources, for example, how to write a data management plan, sample plans, and ways to find appropriate data repositories. Okay, next slide, please.
And that's 1 minute, Marla.
Thank you. Lastly, I want to bring you to this call of action. So for all of us as data service professionals, I think we really need to push to go where the researchers go. And hope, maybe you're already doing this. But I think in order for our training to be effective, we need to know two things. One, what research is being done on campus. And the researchers that are on campus need to know who we are and what kind of services we offer. As a student myself, I didn't really think to go to the library for help with anything aside from like circulation. I didn't really realize the library offered more services. And so, that's partially on me, but it's just a problem that I think stands true today. So here's a short list of some of the places to go. I won't read them all out, but just to highlight a few, I think looking at grad school and like postdoc associations, their program managers like always on the lookout for professional development opportunities for their trainees. So that's been a really great place to go. I also think they're look into what trainee fellowship programs are on your campus and talk to their preceptors, and that might be another really receptive audience. Because marketing is hard, outreach is hard, and I've had a lot more success and attendance at events if I'm presenting at something that's an ongoing series which has a dedicated audience, than if I try to hold them independently from the library. Um, I just also then lastly highly recommend attending or presenting at poster sessions on campus or judging undergrad research days. I actually did that earlier this week. We had our undergrad research day. That really helps you get to know some of the researchers and be out there with them. And in closing, I think we provide a much needed and highly beneficial service in data services. And by using this range of outreach strategies, this is going to help reach all the students who, like I was, didn't really know where to seek support. And with that, I'll just thank you for your attention, and I welcome any questions or comments you have.
Thank you, Marla. Do put those questions in the chat as folks are presenting, and we will have a roundup session at the end. And next we've got Savannah Kelly.
Hi, everybody. I'm Savannah Kelly from the University of Mississippi. I'm the data science and reproducibility librarian, and today's short talk is going to be about how we went from having an idea about offering an R programming workshop and how we wound up executing it, and kind of some takeaways and what we learned and how we did it differently. So let me get started. Next slide, please. Okay, so last year we started a new department at the University of Mississippi that we called SSDS, Scholar Support and Data Services. And we created the department from people who were already working at the library. And I was one of 3 people who came together to form this department. And so we were starting out as a new department, trying to determine, okay, what is the scope and what is it that we want to do? And we went at it with a very open mind. We wanted to be a very flexible department that tried things out. And if we failed, we failed, but we wanted to try stuff that we had never done before. So we had a good kind of intellectual stance of saying, like, okay, what are some things that we wanted to do? And one of the things that I wanted to do was to teach R. And so if you're looking at the slide here, again, the strengths were we're just this brand new department, and we were trying to figure out some new things to do. The other strength was that I had recently finished a PhD program here, and I had a interdisciplinary minor in applied statistics. So I had taken like 30 hours in stats, and I was really familiar with a curriculum that had been offered on campus, and in particular, what was not being offered on campus. And so the faculty that taught here were primarily relying on proprietary quantitative software. So you're thinking like SPSS and SAS and Stata and M+, and everything that you have to pay for. And then when graduate students or undergrads even are graduating, they're losing access to it. We had very few people teaching R, very few people, if any, teaching Python. And so when the students were graduating and coming out and looking at jobs, it was a matter of, I had this quantitative background, but everybody wants you to know R. And nobody was teaching R. So like I said, I took like 30 hours in stats, and I didn't learn R at all in my entire program. And everything that I looked at when I was graduating said, like, you had to know R and Python. And being a librarian, I wanted to turn around that experience and try to prepare other students who were going out into the field to know a software that was going to be immensely useful to them, regardless of their domain. So that was kind of where I was coming from, thinking in terms of why are we going to offer R? So one of the major challenges, I put it's paving the road while you drive on it. So I didn't know R. I had done everything I knew I had done through just professional development on my own. I purchased a bunch of books through the library and was just sitting at my computer trying to figure out how to do it and teach it to myself. And we had never offered anything like this before. And so it was kind of a challenge because we weren't sure where we were going or how to do it. The other issue at hand was the purview and perception. So our library, both internally and externally on campus, is seen as being a very traditional library. And I think in that respect, it worked kind of against us. And so it was a matter of kind of revisioning and trying to communicate to people like this is something the library can have a role in. This is something that people would really value. And so that was something we were trying to change our perception of. And then, the question is, will they even come? So we had not had a lot of good track records offering workshops in the past. So I had been a research librarian about 10 years prior to doing this job. And we would do workshops on all kinds of things and do a lot of preparation. And then we'd have nobody come or very, very few people come. So here we are in this new department. We're trying to see if we could get a workshop off the ground on R, and we don't even know if anybody's going to come or if anybody would be interested. Next slide, please. Okay, so I sat down and I tried to think about, all right, if I'm going to do an R workshop, what am I going to cover? So if any of you have any experience with R, the one thing you'll know is you can do basically anything. And it is very overwhelming because there's so many different packages for doing so many different things. And coming from a background where I took a lot of stats, the first thing that I realized is I'm not going to teach statistics. I'm not going to teach any kind of modeling for two different reasons. Number one, stats are contingent on the discipline. So what they're using in epidemiology is not what they're using in political science, and that's not what they're using in the field of education. And so if I wanted to have the broadest scope and broadest interest, I wasn't going to teach any statistical components at all. And then the other piece of that is, again, like trying to work with academic departments on campus. And when you have the perception that we're a very traditional library and you go out blazing like, oh, we're just going to teach all these workshops on statistical models, not everybody likes that. And so I was trying to carefully kind of put my feet in the water without making too many people agitated. And so you see on the slide here, the kind of umbrella that I went with was what do most disciplines need to know when it comes to quantitative data? And so in three buckets here, that is data import. How do I get my data in here? And how do I manipulate it? Like, how do I create new variables? How do I transpose things? How do I clean my data? Data visualization. How do I make scatter plots and bar charts? And how do I see what I'm looking at? And then reproducible output. How do I make a document that is not just code that I can turn over with collaborators and I can hide the code, but I can make it like this really nice PDF and all of my code is open, but then it's also processed in a way that is useful for people who are not familiar with quantitative analyses. And so what I decided to do was to focus on tidyverse. So when you think about R, there's base R, and then there's tidyverse. Tidyverse you can think of as kind of like a dialect. It uses the pipe when you're coding. But if you're doing like data cleanup and data manipulation, tidyverse, in my opinion, is the way to go. So I decided to teach the tidyverse suite, which includes packages like ggplot, which you may have heard of. That's big data visualization. And then Corto, which previously was R Markdown, and Corto is kind of a bigger version, and that's the reproducibility piece. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so the next thing that I was trying to figure out was how am I going to structure this? R is not really something you can teach in an hour or two, and it really needed to be hands-on. And so what I decided to do was, in terms of the scope, who is this going to be for? People use R differently. And I wasn't going to, I wasn't teaching R to undergrads who wanted to go out and get a job in industry as data scientist. I wanted to teach are to graduate students who wanted to do research or go on in faculty roles. And I had wanted to reach out to people who had been where I had been, where they're learning to work with quantitative data, but they don't know anything about R. So it was closed to undergrads, faculty, and researchers. And then I decided that I would make it a series. And so I just picked a day. I did Wednesdays at 2:00. I decided to do this in person. And it was a 7-week series, and it was every other Wednesday at 2 for an hour. And when we had people register through LibCal, you had to register for the full 7 weeks. So like when you signed up for one, you signed up for all 7. And then the other thing is I was teaching this. So I started this last fall. So I did it last fall and I did it in the spring. And I'm currently doing it now. And it's limited to 20 people because I was the only person doing it and I was teaching live coding. And so I had slides up that were showing the code, and then I actually had RStudio up and they were coding along with me. And I tried to think about like how many people can I possibly teach at one time. And so that's why it was limited to 20 graduate students. And they were from any academic discipline. So
1 minute,
Oh,
Savannah.
okay, sorry. So when we advertised this for the first time last fall, we were like, I don't know if anybody's going to sign up. We'll just see what's going to happen, whatever. We put it out there for sign up, and in 2 days, 48 hours, I had 40 graduate students signed up for this series. And so I only took 20, and then I had 20 on the wait list. And ever since then, like I said, this is the 3rd time that I've done this. We always have a waiting list for people who want to take this course. Next slide, please. Okay, so real quickly, lessons learned. If you're interested in doing something about this, you got to be super clear about the scope, especially when it comes to teaching R or Python. You have to be explicit. So when students signed up, I said like very explicitly, we will cover these things in the 7 weeks. We will not be covering any of this stuff. So if that's what you want, or if you want a particular package that doesn't get covered in this class, you're going to have to do that somewhere else. The very practical thing is you have to have super big screens. So we had 3 large screens in our teaching room, and they wound up not being large enough for people to see the syntax. So the first 2 semesters I did this, I actually had to use projectors. So the screens were used for the slides, and then I projected RStudio onto the wall. So this summer, the library administration actually bought giant screens for our room. That we use now. We have 2, actually 3 mega screens so that students can come and actually see the code. And then the final thing I will say is just don't be intimidated in doing something like this. It's okay to learn on the fly. If I had waited till I felt fully ready and fully competent to teach this, I would never be teaching this. I would not be teaching this now. You're not going to know everything about R. R is very tricky, but R is something, if you just play with it a lot and you spend a lot of time with it, you'll feel comfortable and get better at it as you go. And then I think my final slide is just a question slide, which we will deal with, I think, later in the session. Thank you all.
Wonderful, thank you. And now we've got Mandy.
Hi, this is Mandy. I'm seeing Queen Bee there. Can you click another time to, I think, advance the rest of the info that's on the slide? Thank you. Yes. So Queen Bee is not here, but Mandy is here to talk about our Georgia State University or GSU Data Ready Badge Micro-Credentials program. And I am the head of the Research Data Services Department. So next slide, please. So our research data services has existed since the department has existed since about 2016. And these are the areas, the types of tools and things that we cover. The first 3 bullet points you'll see harkening back to what Megan said, it indicates that we're very much a data science and literacy oriented department. And the last part, data cleaning and data management, the more RDM, is frankly an afterthought for our department. So next slide, please. This is an excerpt from our page that shows all the different people on in the Research Data Services Department. So currently there are 3 of us that are like dedicated RDS members. That would be Hallie Riley, Ashley Rockwell, and myself. And then we have 2 subject librarians, Joel and Rachel, that do some help with data visualization support. And we have 2 graduate students, Ufuk and Siam, who do workshops and such. And then we have a couple other graduate students and a couple undergraduates that are associated with a whole different initiative that I'm not even going to touch on today. But so our support services are, we do one-on-one help, we do custom sessions for research teams and courses. And then just like the previous speaker that just spoke, we do workshops, live workshops, doing them again more in person, and we have recorded workshops. And in 2022, we implemented in January 2022 a micro-credential badges course or badges to go along with our workshops. So that's what I'm going to mostly talk about today is our badges. So next slide, please. So we have what we would call 2 tracks of badges. So the one track is our Data Ready badge. The target group for that is really undergrads, although anybody can get it. And this is anybody as in any GSU student, faculty, or staff member can get any of these badges. But that one was created by my colleague Ashley Rockwell to mostly target undergraduates. It's very much focused on core data literacy skills and concepts, covers a variety of tools and topics, and it is a video series. So it's 9 videos total, and they are about 10 minutes on average. And once people complete watching the videos and then doing these quizzes, they earn a badge. And I'll talk more about the ins and outs of the quizzes and stuff in just a moment. And then the other track you see there is what we call our software and coding training badges. That's really meant for everybody basically, and is data analysis and visualization kind of focused workshop series. And so some of the things are R, Python, SPSS, etc., are all listed there. And most of the 11 total badges are tied to like a particular either tool or like the Data Viz badge is definitely tied to Tableau, but there's also Social Explorer mapping tools also taught within that. So those are kind of our badges in a nutshell. Next slide, please. So how does it work? So we are using the platforms of Canvas and Badger. So the way that this works is GSU students, faculty, or staff, they enroll in a course through what GSU has branded Stacks, which is basically Canvas. It's not a course for credit, so that confuses people sometimes, but it's a course that anybody can sign up for. So they sign up for it, and then once they are signed up, they can go into the Canvas page, and there are the different badges. Modules are there. So I have a screenshot on this slide of the In Vivo Ready badge. So the In Vivo Ready badge is a 2 workshop series. So people have to complete In Vivo 1 and In Vivo 2. Each one of them has a quiz, and they have to score 100% on each of those quizzes before they can earn the badge. Now, in general, the workshops, because we often have particularly faculty wanting to know if they're going to assign these for their classes. They want to know how much time am I going to be asking my students to invest. Depending on how many workshops there are in the series, which there's usually like 2 to 3, it could be 5 hours, it could be up to 7.5 hours per badge. Quizzes, we limit those to roughly about 5 questions per quiz, which each workshop has a quiz, and those are multiple choice, true, false, maybe some matching. They're all done in a way to be automated in terms of grading, so we don't have to do any hands-on. That was very important. We don't want to hands-on grade anything. So once they score 100% on all those quizzes, and they can try as many times as they need to. Once they've done that, next slide, please. Congratulations. So they get their badge automatically. And so I have a screenshot of kind of what the page of the badge looks like. And then in terms of how they can share those badges, here's an example of a graduate student who posted it on LinkedIn, so they can easily put it on LinkedIn as a post. They can also put it in LinkedIn's, I think, like licenses and certifications or something like that. They can email them to people. So for example, some professors use our badges for either extra credit or required credit for their courses. So they will usually, we tell them, just tell your student to email you the link to go see their badge to confirm that. They can embed code on sites if they want to. So lots of ways to share this achievement. So next slide, please. So why should students and everyone get badges? So, we try to kind of market these it is a marker of achievement. People really are like, I'm on LinkedIn and I see people all the time saying, I just completed this certification. I just did this. So it's a marker of achievement. It does demonstrate learning because there are quizzes tied to the badges that assess learning. So it's not just a mere, I watched the workshop or I attended it. They do have to demonstrate some kind of learning. And we really like to market them for career readiness purposes, that data skills equals jobs. And we have some quotes here showing that more and more, regardless of what field students go into, they may be asked to do something with data. So we're trying to tell everybody, it doesn't matter what field you're planning on going to. At some point, somebody's probably going to ask you, help us do something with this data we have. So next slide, please. So I want to give you a little assessment data from our first year that we had the badges. So the first year was 2022. And in that first year, there were 345 total badges earned. Of those total badges, 54% were awarded to graduate students, 36% to undergraduates, and 10% to faculty or staff. And then there were actually 203 earners. So people were earning multiple badges. Some people, go whole hog and just learn all of them. But they average about 2 badges per earner. And in terms of split with undergraduate, graduate students, and faculty or staff, more undergraduates percentage-wise, those 46%, graduate was 43%, and then employees or faculty staff was 11%. And we do have some data to show that badge earning spans about 50 academic majors for the undergrad and or the graduate students. So a wide range are earning these badges. Next slide, please. So now this one's loaded up with all the badges, but this is basically a breakdown for that inaugural year again of how many undergrads or grads and faculty or staff earned the different badges. I highlighted these two, particularly the Data Ready badge and the Data Viz badge, because they are the most popular badges and particularly comparatively more popular amongst the undergrads. And like reflecting on why are they probably the most popular, it's probably because they're the most accessible in that the Data Ready badge I already talked about is more those foundational learning concepts about data. The Data Viz badge is learning Tableau and the Social Explorer mapping database. So those two badges don't require like advanced statistical knowledge or methods knowledge. So I think they're just more accessible. And then definitely the Data Viz Ready, and particularly probably because it has Tableau as a feature, I think people know more about Tableau. We've recently added a Power BI workshop because people are interested in that too. So Data Viz is very popular for people knowing about it, and again, more applicable like across all the different disciplines and such. Next slide.
And 1 minute, Mandy.
Okay, thank you. So this is the same slide, but just to highlight that in terms of kind of looking at what badges seem to be more popular, maybe amongst graduate students comparatively, the R our two R badges and the Python badges are comparatively more popular for grads than undergrads. And we think that this probably reflects, again, maybe because grad students are more at those advanced levels and recognize these tools are important. But we look at this data and think we really need to find ways to make maybe more content with R and Python that's more targeted towards undergrads so that they can get these skills as well. Next slide, please. So who's on board in terms of who do we know are using these badges in some way in their courses? There are these different graduate programs, Master in International Business, Law, Legal Analytics, nursing program are using them. The grad school created a 1 credit hour data jam course that they offer in the spring that they use our content. The College to Career Ready to Go Set Go trainings, individual professors have used them. And the College of Arts and Sciences is launching next fall a Data 1501 course where I think they intend to use our badges as part of their curriculum content. So next slide, please. Queen Bee, she's back. I thought that's right. So that was our badges program in a nutshell. And when we get to the Q&A, and I'll take a look at the chat, but when we get to all this, I'm happy to ask more questions. My email's on there. It's very tiny. I can put that in the chat as well to share. So thank you so much.
Wonderful, thank you. Moving on to our last speaker, Ali Kirsten.
Hello, I'm going to talk to everyone today about formulating institutional research data policy at whatever institution you may find yourself. Next slide. So before we get too far into what we did at my institution, which is Auburn University, I wanted to talk a little bit about why institutional data policy is necessary or helpful, because don't all the funders already have their data policies in place? And the answer is, everybody has different sources of funding. I know that if you're at, for instance, a health sciences library or a medical library, you might have a heavy dose of NIH, as you might imagine. But at most universities, you do have a range of funders that may all have their own policies. And also, there's a lot of research that is funded by agencies that either don't have a data policy or it's simply not funded or sponsored research. Either it's a pilot study that's intended to go for funding, or it's just not funded scholarship for whatever reason, and it still may produce research data, and guidance is still, needed in that regard. And that's one of those things that if you can have it be more uniform across your institution, that really helps the PIs out. That really helps the researchers out. And that was the one thing that surprised me, I think, as we went down this journey of adopting a research data policy at Auburn. It's really something that many of the faculty wanted. Not all of the faculty, as we'll discuss later, but this was something that had a broad base of support so that the researchers didn't have to rely on, what does my department say? How have we always done this? What's this random rule of thumb? They really wanted Auburn level data policy that was going to be consistent across our various areas. So next slide. Speaking of various areas, Auburn University is a fairly large university. It's Alabama's land-grant university, one of them. And the main thing about Auburn is it became an R1 institution in 2018. So I would like to think Auburn was punching above its weight for some time in terms of its research activity. Such that even though it was an R2, it was really verging on that R1 territory. But what we didn't have, and arguably still don't have, is the research infrastructure that you might expect at an R1 institution. Research data policy being one component of that, but also thinking about things like IT, also thinking about things like coordination between units on these issues of data management and data policy and just expectations around research. We really had a lot of siloing and a lot of departments and colleges doing their own thing. Just to give you one example, speaking of health sciences research only, for a campus that does not have a medical school beyond the vet school would be very upset with me if I didn't mention that. We do a tremendous amount of health sciences research across nearly all of our colleges, from health disparities research to nutrition and food security and family development and services, all sorts of things. And all of those areas of study are producing data and need some kind of, again, a bare minimum or a consistent set of expectations of how to manage that data, what its life cycle should be. Again, things that are more familiar to us as part of this crowd, but not so much with the researchers themselves, right? We've already heard in a couple other talks that librarians and other sort of research support specialists may be speaking one language, and the researchers, the scientists, the clinicians, they may be speaking a different language. So next slide. So how did we get started? Well, I am in the libraries, of course, and this is a point that I really want to emphasize. We did not wait for this conversation to pick up steam on campus. We started discussing research data policy and trying to figure out what sort of policy would support research at the university within the libraries fairly early on. We didn't wait for permission. So I encourage you, if you are in a position to discuss this within your units, within your library, make sure to involve library leadership and at least let them know that the discussion is ongoing so that they can be prepared if they get asked about it at a higher level. But the nice thing about being in the libraries is, of course, we have this direct experience with research and researchers. And so we were perhaps in some senses better equipped to understand how researchers are tackling the problems they're facing now, what do they need, how to communicate with them. Again, a theme that we've had come up in several talks is the need to discuss these issues with researchers and with administrators in a way where everybody's going to understand what's going on, and also everybody's going to feel as though it's a two-way conversation and nobody's getting lost in the language and the jargon. And so what the product of this was in the libraries was to have that sort of talking point lined up for the next step in the process. So next slide. While our internal library preparation was going on, research administrators on campus were also aware of these issues. We're also aware of the Holdren memo from 2013. Of course, this was prior to the Nelson memo, but lots of NSF funding on our campus, lots of federal funding in general. Research administrators knew that this issue was not going away. And so what essentially happened was we had this fortuitous raising of the issue among the associate deans for research, and it allowed the library this entry point where we could say, hey, we've already been talking about this, and we had our presentation ready to go, and we were able to have these discussions with research administrators basically as soon as it came up. So next slide. How to actually get policy implemented on campus was not something that I knew really anything about as a research data management librarian, but some of my colleagues in the libraries had much more experience in this regard. We do have a senator, since our librarians are faculty. It's not me, but we do have a library senator. And so it became clear that even though research administrators were demanding this policy, very much in support of this policy, it had to go through the faculty senate, or as we call it, the university senate. So we presented it as an information item in the summer of 2021. So this is already more than a year that we've been working on this since we started the internal library portion of it. And it got delegated to a subcommittee called the Faculty Research Committee, which not only had library representation, but fortunately, I was also on it as an ex officio member. And this is where we really took the draft policy that I had already made up with, again, some colleagues helping me, and had presented it to the Senate. But in that faculty research committee and a subcommittee they assigned to this, that's where we got into the weeds on that draft and tweaked the language. And also, this was the stage where we were communicating with all those stakeholders, not in the administration, but again, with the people actually doing the work, with the researchers, with research offices that may have been located within the units, and with OIT as well. So we had to involve IT because they have been very focused on matters of data security and compliance. Again, harkening back to an earlier talk. So much synergy in our presentations today. That is a main concern of OIT. And so any discussion of data policy is going to have to include them. So we did this throughout the fall of 2021. And so by January 2022, we had an updated draft that we were ready to bring back to the Senate. We did bring it back to the Senate, and it would have gone to a vote at that point, but there was still enough contention around it that we realized we didn't end up taking the vote on it in January, and we had further discussion and further revisions. And so next slide, please. This was where we really benefited from the help of administration. I think that despite all the best efforts of us within the libraries, our team, and then the faculty research committee and the subgroup within the faculty research committee, if we did not have the support of higher administrators to keep this moving and keep it on the agenda, I think our data policy may have fallen off right at that early 2022 juncture, because as soon as there was some resistance, that's where people in the faculty senate or people around campus tend to get a little bit skittish of this. And so you really do need those champions a bit higher up on the food chain, to use a bio metaphor, to keep things on track. And we did have that. And we also had the benefit of the general counsel to take a look at our draft data policy. But it was very important to me, and I think to most of the other people working on this, we never wanted a policy that was written by general counsel or written by lawyers. We wanted this policy written by researchers, or at least we had adapted it from what other institutions had done, but the language came from researchers and people familiar with the work. It was not supposed to be legalese. It was very important to us that our policy was something that people could understand and follow, and that any legalese that had to be in there, for instance, suggestions by general counsel, was for a very specific purpose and kept to a minimum. And again, fortunately, I think that's what happened. So by April of 2022, thank you, we brought this back, we put it to a vote, and a giant weight was lifted off my shoulders when this policy passed. So the policy passed, and it was adopted in our official policy on policies in June of 2022. And because it's buried on the policy page and very difficult to find organically, I made a short link that I always share with anyone on campus or anyone else who's interested to actually view the policy, to make it easy to get to. And next slide. So this is where we end up. What I've learned from this process is, again, you cannot have too much communication, and especially outside of the group that you're working with. The libraries needed to be talking to researchers and research administrators. Research administrators had to talk to general counsel and had to talk to OIT. And a lot of times the skills that librarians have facilitate this process. So that's one of our strengths, I think, as the type of professionals that we are. Have something ready to go. Don't wait until the question comes up. Have those talking points, have a presentation, and just be ready at a moment's notice to be able to speak to somebody about it. Again, that broader support and buy-in helps. This worked because many faculty on campus who are active in research recognized the need and wanted it to move forward. That said, we did have the people who were not happy, and you've got to recognize that that's always going to happen. There is no way you can satisfy everybody, and nobody's going to get everything they want, including you, the framers of the policy. And so that's just something necessary that you've got to accept and move on. And the final lesson that I learned that I think, again, this is where the library excelled, is ownership of the project. Somebody who's keeping track of it, who has it as sort of their baby, in a sense that they are not going to allow it to be lost in the shuffle. It was the libraries in the beginning. I think as we moved ahead, it became more of the faculty research committee. I worked very closely with the chair of that committee. But again, we were the project owners, the project leads, and we were in charge of shepherding it forward. So that is what I had, and I welcome everyone's questions, and thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Those were incredible. Big applause all around for all of our presenters. I've seen a few questions happening in the chat. Feel free to keep putting them there. We haven't had a ton. So if you do want to unmute yourself and ask, I believe we could probably facilitate that as well. And then I've got just a brief rundown of who our speakers were and kind of what their topics were here on the screen if you need a little reminder. But with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and take a look at our chat and see what we've got going on here. I know Mandy was answering quite a few of them. We've got one for Allie, I see. Let me stop sharing so we can have a little bit of a chat with each other. So Allie, even beyond computer technology, I remember how difficult it was to define/keep a locking filing cabinet in a locked room to store data from a research project I worked on as a grad student. I remember thinking that Department of University should have had some process set up for that type of stuff. I'm curious if the policy push helped create or give more departments access to data-related infrastructure.
I don't know if the policy specifically has done that, but I do know that this is an ongoing issue on campus. And part of the problem that we have at Auburn, which may also be the case at other institutions, is we are so decentralized that the colleges and the departments are really able to do their own thing quite a bit. And some have vastly more resources than others, and some are just not able to keep pace with those things. But since other colleges or departments do have what they need, they don't have a lot of appetite to sort of help other units catch up. And they're certainly not about to share the resources that they have in order to do so. So I hope we're moving forward towards, for instance, more uniform provisioning of storage. Some colleges, for example, engineering, we're a huge engineering school. When I think of what college at Auburn has the best of the best, my brain goes to engineering. They absolutely have all of the secure network storage that they could ever want at all levels of security and access. And a college like, for instance, College of Liberal Arts doesn't have that as much. You know, College of Liberal Arts has maybe a 2 or 3 person IT team. And this is distinct from our central OIT. So that's maybe a bit more detail than was necessary, but I think that just as we have these policy discussions, we also need to remember what you're talking about, which is to look at those details of, do people have what they need to do their work? And the answer is often no. And librarians, again, are often in a position to help communicate those needs or those shortcomings to people who might actually be able to make some decisions about it.
Great, thank you. I'm going to circle back to one of our first presenters if we don't have any other questions in the chat. I'm not seeing any at the moment. Megan, I'm wondering if you could speak to maybe how you would advise somebody who's wanting to begin looking outside of libraries for jobs and kind of the data services, data science world. Is there any like language differentials you've seen or any tips you might have around that?
Yeah, so one of the things that I noticed pretty much right away, so my own position, when they first reached out to me, I guess I didn't really have time to get into the specifics, but let me tell you a little bit more about how I was initially approached about that job. A recruiter reached out to me on LinkedIn, which I am like the furthest thing from a LinkedIn power user. So I was very skeptical at first, and I thought it was some sort of bot or spam. But it was for a job that had the word informatics in the title. And just based on the job description, it really did not seem at first to me like it was something that I was going to be super qualified for. I thought there was a mismatch there. And it took kind of almost convincing and talking a lot with them, being like, this is my skill set. Like, I'm very sure of what I can do. And like, I'm very confident in the skill set I do have. I'm just trying to make sure that that actually matches what you're looking for. And we went back and forth quite a bit. But yeah, the language was very different. They were using the word informatics, not in a way really that I had necessarily seen it before. I was, my job was research informatics, I believe. But the job is positioned within, so, there's the big umbrella of OIT. And then under that, there is a smaller group that deals with research IT. And so I'm on that team. And I'm research data. I think my system title is research data informatics or something like that. So that would be one thing to look for. But really, it's just looking at, any job that is going to be asking for familiarity with research data practices, data management. If it mentions a couple of federal things like NSPM 33 or the OSTP memos, that would be another signifier to me that a librarian would be a really good fit for that job. That's all I've got at the moment.
Wonderful, thank you. I've got one for Marla as well. I'm wondering if you could speak to kind of the tension between established incentive policies for faculty and data management kind of practices not always being in alignment with that. Is that something you've found an approach that works for you too?
I missed what you said about the established, what? Can you repeat?
Just established incentive policies around, faculty output, kind of what they're given credit for, and data management not always being in alignment with that in terms of their effort.
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I'm hoping as a society and institution, we're moving more towards giving more equal weight to those other things like reproducibility studies, to sharing of raw data, to doing really expert data curation. But right now they're not reflected in our tenure and promotion for faculty, but I would hope that they would be, and I would be really interested in kind of helping move that forward. Yeah, but that's a tough question. And I mentioned that about that shift, and that we need to start thinking about that in a lot of my presentations to like our Office of Research and to our sort of upper administration, maybe something interesting to bring to the attention of the Faculty Senate. But I think that's really important.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that's a struggle. I didn't imagine that anybody would have, a clean answer to that, but I hope that we can continue moving that forward.
Well, I think it's so critical. Oh, sorry. Just
please.
to mention, if we don't reward those good practices, then folks won't do them. So I think it kind of goes hand in hand with my ideas about institutionalizing things. If you're really serious about it, you also have to award those good practices. And right now, like if someone does a reproducibility study, sometimes they even have trouble getting it published. And so it's also on the publisher's side, they need to, sort of step up and publish these things as well, because they have value.
Yeah, so true. Absolutely. Savannah, I was wondering, I really loved your phrase, paving the road while driving on it. But did you pick up any tips while you were a learner yourself, trying to learn R and immerse yourself in this kind of, new tool that you applied in your teaching to your students?
Yeah, I think it actually was really beneficial that I had recently learned R myself, because I knew of all the pain points. Simple things like not knowing where your directory is. So when you're saving stuff or making documentation or plots, like you have no idea where it is. I don't currently teach Git to the group in the 7 sessions, but when I learned that myself and I connected it to RStudio, that like changed my life completely. But it's very simple things like, forgetting your parenthesis, lots of small little things that'll catch you, like trying to apply a function when you haven't loaded the package or haven't called on the package in any way. So it was actually really helpful to learn it myself fairly recently, because it made me so much more compassionate with the students. It's not like I was an expert and I had been doing this for 10 years. It was like, oh, I just did that 6 months ago, and it totally made me feel like I was losing my mind. Here's how you fix it. So it was good. It was good to be a new learner.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine that'd be a very empathetic experience. Mandy, I'm going to give you one more. Coming from a less established, less robust RDS program here at UTHSC, I'm curious what factors at your institution or personnel-wise, environmentally, you think have set you up for such a, well-established, robust, really effective program?
I would say part of it was just because nobody else was doing it. So like that's basically how our department started, is because we would see that there were students and faculty, that needed this training, these workshops, and like there was a gap. Nobody on campus was really doing it. So seeing the demand and then deciding to try to fill it, I think helped establish us well. And we have been around for quite a while at this point. COVID really kind of, though, to put a damper on things, like we saw a noticeable drop in, workshop attendance and really getting people to come back to those. Now, part of that may be pre-COVID, we didn't offer any of our recordings or any of our workshops as recordings. So it was like you come or you don't get it. You don't get the content. And so then we started providing the recordings because of COVID hitting. And now just trying to get anybody back into like a face-to-face workshop I think it's not so much about people being afraid of COVID. I think it's that they've just grown accustomed to I'm just going to go watch the workshop. So we've had a little bit of, I would say, setbacks from that. But we're trying to get our momentum back. The badges, I think, really have, because some of the faculty in like the College of Arts and Sciences, they've learned about it and they want to try to use those, because we really do try to spin it and market it as, hey, look, this is packaged content for you to drop into your course and you don't basically have to do anything. We've done the work for you. So that's always a good marketing tool, is what can we do for you so you don't have to put the work into it. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question completely, but that's my answer.
Or like, what's your secret?
Yeah, what's my secret? The secret is to have nobody else doing anything. And having, I should, give a shout out to our administration. Having a library administration that supports this. I don't think that there's always that kind of culture in other libraries. I mean, even with our own library, there are still people that look at us like, what are you doing? Like that's not what librarians do. I'm like doing air quotes with my pen like stuck on my finger. But so trying to change that culture has sometimes been a challenge within the library, but the folks at the top support it. So that definitely helps a lot.
Absolutely. We want to be mindful of our time. We had so much great discussion in the chat, and I believe we're having some good conversations within the Padlet as well. So I hope that you will peruse both of those at your leisure. And a big round of applause. Thank you again to all of our presenters. Those were wonderful presentations. I learned so much. We will be, again, distributing this recording after the session. So if you have colleagues that are interested in watching this later, please feel free to send that along to them as well. And thank you from my end over here at UTHSC, and I'm sure NNLM Region 2 also wants to send you a thank you as well for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone. We're glad to have you here.
Thanks for watching. This video was produced by the network of the National Library of Medicine. Select the circular channel icon to subscribe to our channel, or select a video thumbnail to watch another video from the channel.